All right, now we're going into step 5, and this is where the spiritual integration comes in. This is where we can connect veterans to a broader church life. This is the time frame from this is really it's ongoing. It starts at about 3 to 4 months after the safe spaces are established, right? So we've done all the other steps. We got everything established. But once veterans have connected with each other, now we can help them connect to the broader church community, right? So we're establishing this foundational ministry where we have to get them to connect first and connect with the team leaders and the team members and the volunteers within this smaller community before we can now start to integrate them into the spiritual integration and connect them broaderly to the church. So this is an ongoing thing, but it would probably start about month 3 or month 4 of being established. It really depends on how often you meet and how easy it is for people to connect, things like that. So, so with that, we have some action items, and what do they look like? Create bridge opportunities. That's the first action item. This is where you invite veterans to serve an existing ministry based on their skills. So this is where I said, this is where we use the opportunity to put veterans on their next mission. I believe that this is possibly the most important piece of everything, is putting a veteran on his next mission, his or her next mission. So examples of this, maybe there's a logistic expert. Well, he can help with church events. Maybe there's medical personnel. Maybe there's a combat medic or a nurse or whatever. They can help with the health ministry or mission trips, for example. Maybe you have a retired 1-star general. Well, obviously he or she might be a really good small group leader or deacon, right? So let's match the veterans with non-veteran mentors in the church. And then encourage the participation in any kind of small groups or Sunday schools or anything like that. Encourage the participation where they're applicable. If you have a church security team, maybe some veterans might be applicable to that. Maybe they're not. That's for you guys to decide. I'm just saying, put them on their next mission. This is very important. This is an opportunity to pair them with a non-veteran. So now they're getting acclimated to the church as a whole. This is key. Another action item, address the theological questions in a safe setting. So now we're starting to get into the theological questions we talked about. Where was God in combat? Can a soldier follow Jesus? How do I deal with the moral injury? What does forgiveness look like for what I've done? Right? These are the questions that need to be answered. So you can host quarterly tough questions. Right? We're having a tough questions session today, specifically for veterans at this location at this time, right? Invite guest speakers, right? Who understand the military experience. There's plenty out there. Social media is rampant with them. You can have them Zoom in and be a guest speaker at one of these events. You can create written resources and address common problems as well. Caveat to this, as a small little tip or warning, be careful with any kind of written resources that address problems, because they can be generic, right? And they may ostracize someone where they're not getting addressed, if that makes sense. So just be careful with that. But having these tough question sessions, hugely important, I think, in the long run. Another action item under this step would be to integrate veteran perspectives into the church life. Invite veterans to share appropriately, of course, in worship services. They can talk about their experiences when they're ready. They can talk about give their testimony, potentially. I could tell you, as a combat veteran, when I was serving in the military, I was not working for God. I was all about Michael Furmanski, right? I was living my life in sin and debauchery. Doesn't sound like a hero to me, right? We go back to some of the first trainings, that hero complex. Doesn't sound like a hero to me, right? So I'm embarrassed by some of the things I've done. I've overcome them through Christ, who gives me strength to do this, right? And I've overcome all the questions that we talked about, right? So it's possible. And so I can share my testimony. I can share how I came to Jesus Christ. I can share how I made decisions that I made. So these are some examples where you can incorporate them. You can ask the veterans to lead in areas beyond just military expertise, right? Military doesn't define who we are. It is a piece of who we are, right? And so understanding that we can grow beyond that. And many of the times veterans want to grow beyond that, right? So you can include military families and family ministry programs. Just because they're a military family doesn't mean they're any different. They're a family. And you can also recognize that veterans have much to offer beyond their military service. Again, this is all about putting them on their next mission. Okay. Final action item, and this is really kind of the heat of what I do. I'm studying pastoral counseling, working very diligently. I'm becoming a doctor of pastoral counseling in my doctorate in ministry, and this is where we, as a milestone, could offer pastoral counseling specifically tailored to the veteran experience. And this is where you can train pastoral counselor teams on moral injury. So all the stuff that we built in the foundation where we learned it ourselves, we had to educate ourselves, we can now teach the pastoral counseling staff, if you have one, on how to overcome these things. Develop referral relationships with veteran-specific counselors in the community. That would be huge. You should probably do that in the front end, to be honest with you. But you can do it here. You can also consider bringing in specialized counselors quarterly, where they can sit down in a group and do a group session or even one-on-one sessions. And don't try to handle everything in-house. Know that you got to know when to refer. As pastors, as leaders, as ministers, even as pastoral counselors, we are not clinically trained. And therefore, we have to know when our limitations are up, right? When we have reached a limitation, we understand that this person could benefit from true clinical help. We should refer them outside of that. Period. And so that's what we want to do during this. So those are the milestones of this one. So why does step 5 matter? Well, look, step 5 matters because veterans don't want to be segregated. We don't. It's okay to develop our community, a veterans ministry community. That's awesome. But we don't want to be segregated. We want to be integrated into the church. We want to feel part of the family, part of the home. The goal isn't to create a veterans-only church within your church. No, it's to help veterans find their place and just be part of the congregation. Again, we've talked about it many times. You've got the church, the military, or veteran life. Let's merge it together. How do we marry it together? This is what it's all about. Into step 6, this is where the family comes in, okay? Family inclusion. Ministering to the whole veteran household. Again, this was huge. I was talking about it just a minute ago. So this is another ongoing thing. It can happen really simultaneously with step 5 or a month later. You can stage it out however you want. But basically, combat affects entire families, not just the veteran. My time served overseas, I was a single soldier. I didn't have a family. I didn't impact a spouse or children. Thank God. Because I've seen what it does. But here, look, without getting into too much, I'm going to just go right into action items so we can really push it forward. You want to create support groups for military families and military spouses. They have a unique trauma that they experience. One that I can't even speak on. Again, I was a single soldier, had no spouse, and I was never a spouse of a combat veteran. Well, I technically kind of was. My wife served, but you know what I'm saying. And so spouses aren't just women; they're also men. So bear that in mind. When my wife's last few years in the military, I was no longer associated or affiliated with the military at all. Her last duty station was Anchorage, Alaska, Joint Base Elmendorf, Richardson. I was up there, and I was feeling left out of the community. Didn't have a church that really established myself really well with. I mean, I felt like I was just outside of everything. And I'm born and raised in New York, so I'm like as far away as you could possibly be in Alaska from my friends network, from everything. All I had was my wife, and I knew that's not healthy for me. So there was a military Facebook group for military spouses. But everything they did was like G.I. Jane Day or whatever. It was all geared towards women, which, by the way, is the common sex, is the common spouse. But I wasn't. I don't want to be G.I. Jane. You know what I mean? I would like to be included, but I'm a dude. And I simply responded with that, and they actually kicked me out of the Facebook group. That is what we don't want, church. Okay? Obviously, I overcame all that. You know what I mean? I'm here today. But I bring that up to explain what we don't want to do. Understand that military spouses are, yes, they're predominantly women, but they're not always. Okay? So spouses carry their own deployment trauma and transition challenges. They also often feel isolated and misunderstood. I even talked about that just recently. Monthly gatherings specific for those spouses would be huge and beneficial. And you could have topics like deployment stress, reintegration, or parenting warrior kids, right? Another action item we want to have is to develop programming for military children. So this is children of veterans who face unique challenges, guys. Include them in children's ministry with awareness that their background is a little bit different. Okay? Address deployment-related anxiety or behavioral issues, especially if their parents are still serving and they're going to deploy or things like that. And then create peer connections between military kids because they share that common trauma. We call it trauma bonding. I'm not an expert clinician, but anyone can look it up. Trauma bonding exists. We laugh about it and joke about it in the military that we're all trauma bonded together, right? So, so offer that for children. It's huge. These are going to be hard steps, guys. This is going to be, step 6 is a really difficult one to establish and build. But it's going to bring this veteran ministry and understanding into the fold. It's going to be huge. Offer marriage enrichment specific to military couples. Military couples go through unique traumas. Military, multiple deployment, stresses marriages. You have communication patterns form a military context that affects the civilian lives. So we communicate differently in the military. Therefore, the people serving communicate differently to their spouses. You have PTSD impacts on intimacy and family dynamics. You have sexually related traumas, to be honest with you, that happen or are very common in the military. Adultery is common in the military. There's all kinds of things that happen that put stresses on the family and the marriage. Let's offer some military marriage counseling services. We can do so as a pastoral counselor from a biblical perspective, and we can also refer outside of the church. Another action item is to include families in veteran ministry activities. Family-friendly service projects, family recreation days. You can include children in appropriate recognition events, or basically just normalize the military family experience within the church family. That's ultimately what we're trying to do. Okay. So why is this step 6 important? If you only minister to the veteran while ignoring their family, you've missed the larger picture. Healthy families support veterans' integration and